Taku tū wata wata taku manu kōruru whatu pote o te iwi. Tā hora hora na ko te wai ko whiti whiti ko te wai puna kapua.
Lake Taupō, a special place at the heart of central North Island, New Zealand. Renowned for its beauty, clear water, fish life, and as the headwater of New Zealand's longest river, the Waikato. Regarded as a cultural taonga or treasure of local Māori, Ngāti Tūwharetoa, Lake Taupō also has wider iconic status for New Zealand as a whole. Its pristine waters are, however, under threat, with science showing increasing levels of nitrogen. The nitrogen contamination has come from a range of sources, the most significant manageable source being from farm animal urine, deposited on land within the lake's 500 square kilometre catchment. Much of this contaminant travels below the ground by aquifer and, in most cases, enters the lake after many years. Doing nothing was not an option. Without action, this special place would come under increasing threat. However, dealing with diffuse unseen contamination on this scale had little national or international precedent. This story reflects the unique partnerships, policies, processes, and the determination and innovation of a wide range of people, including scientists, politicians, local farmers, and the New Zealand public as a whole. But the story starts with Ngāti Tūwharetoa and its long relationship with the lake that it treasures. That relationship demands a clean and healthy lake for these children, their descendants, and all New Zealanders of the future.
Lake Taupō, Taupō Moana, is a taonga of Tūwharetoa. It's the relationship that Tūwharetoa has with Taupō Moana or Lake Taupō extends back 28, 29 generations to the time of our tupuna, our eponymous ancestor Ngāti Tūwharetoa, who arrived here on the Tarawa canoe and came to this area and claimed this area as an area that his people and his future descendants will occupy and take care of.
As the largest landowner around the lake, Tūwharetoa entities have had the most opportunity to contribute to ensure a cleaner Lake Taupō.
Ngāti Tūwharetoa has always played an active role in terms of the natural resource management, the stewardship of Lake Taupō. It extended back many decades prior to this development. It actually extended back to more recent, further times, to the time establishment of our forestry estates that were developed in the catchment as a means to protect and mitigate the eutrophication that was taking place in the catchment, identified very early on in the 50s and 60s.
Tony Petch, a scientist with the Waikato Regional Council, which has the primary responsibility for the water quality of the lake, has been a long-time observer of the lake. He formed part of a science and policy team that identified falling water quality and developed an innovative approach to reducing nitrogen flows into the lake by 20%, thereby securing the lake's future health. Conveying to the public what the science was saying when the lake itself looked so good was a key part of the project.
There's a kind of suspended disbelief that something's going on. But the science at the time was quite compelling, and we had some very good records. Of course, it wasn't just us starting in the mid-90s and moving through to present day. There'd been some early observations of water quality in the 30s, in the 50s, and then there was a DSIR water quality lab over at Taupō that was operating through the 60s. So we were able to detect these trends quite clearly and carefully. But the question that you ask in terms of public belief as to whether it was worth intervening or not, that involved significant amount of public engagement, consultation, and particularly working with the communities and especially the rural community. While we're talking about water quality and people think of chemistry and we talk of nitrogen and phosphorus, actually the overall project is a community change project. So while we're looking at the science of the lake, for example, we also have to understand what the community's thinking. So we spent a lot of time with them looking at what was important to them around the lake, and they gave us in the early 1998, we had a big survey about what was important. And this project relates to 3 of those important aspects of community identified: clean water, good trout fishing, and a weed-free lake.
One of those involved with community engagement was Taupō Mayor at the time, Clayton Stent, now also chair of the Lake Taupō Protection Trust. He says there is huge pride in what has been achieved, and having the project endorsed by the OECD as a best practice example of tackling the problem of diffuse nutrient pollution of a major water body. He says while the buying and trading of nitrogen and carbon were key in reaching environmental targets, the Lake Taupō project is special for other reasons too.
We've identified that it's unique, and that's been acknowledged on a world stage. But it's not unique just for the outcomes in terms of nitrogen. I think it's particularly special because it's shown what people working together can actually do. It's one of the fundamental cornerstones of the success of this project has been the collaborative approach. There were people that were going to win and lose throughout this whole thing. Everybody knew that. But at the end of the day, whether you're a winner or a loser, everybody came together to say, this body of water is special to us all. We have to do what we need to do to make sure that it sustains. So on an individual basis, what does that mean for me? And solutions came out of that. The collaboration between government departments and private landowners, between private landowners, government departments and iwi. There's a whole series of intermeshing relationships that have gone on. But everybody has kept focused on the benefit of what we're doing here. And that I think is pretty special.
To achieve the major policies developed, a broad political support was needed. Waikato farmer Jenny Vernon was very much part of this political mix. At the time, she was chair of the Waikato Regional Council. Her role was to help introduce the Lake Taupō project to the local community and to get it officially endorsed by that council. There was no question that at the outset, protecting the future of the lake was as much a political project as it was environmental.
Nobody can deny we wanted to look after the lake. That was the principal thing. And I mean, even for iwi, that was their big challenge. There was a bigger picture. And so we had to go slowly, we had to do lots and lots of engagement. Even for us as councillors, I mean, really hard, you know. I look at this farming, I'm farming born and bred, and suddenly we were telling farmers, well, actually you're going to have to go for a resource consent for something you've taken for granted for 150 years. That's a big hurdle, big attitudinal change, and politically a huge challenge. And you go back, when was it, 2000, 2002, farming attitudes then are very different from 2016. So it was the very, very beginning of we have an issue to address. It's greater than the individual. Your economics is, yes, important, but there is a taonga to protect. And so there was huge debate. And so it was really the beginning of all of farmer, non-point source discharges. We're all accountable. And you had a big story to tell.
Getting the story across to farmers that their farming operations would have to change was a big challenge. Mike Barton, with wife Sharon, farmers in the catchment, now raise beef cattle in a farming operation that is endorsed as environmentally sustainable and marketed as Taupō beef. In the early days of the project, Mike Barton headed a farming group whose members were facing a threat to their livelihoods as a result of the capping of nitrogen leaching. He says farmers naturally wanted to fight back, but eventually came round to the fact that farming was going to have to be very different. He says one of the ways forward, once limits were set, was the trading of nitrogen.
I think it would be fair to say that most farmers felt that the nitrogen market would allow the most efficient form of farming under a nitrogen cap to surface, and so that nitrogen would be moved around farming systems so that it found, using market language, it found the most efficient and most profitable use for that nitrogen. And we were comfortable with that, as opposed to a more regulatory approach which said you couldn't do this or you couldn't do that. We wanted the market to determine those things. So on balance, I think the market's been excellent. I mean, as far as I know, it's still the only non-point source nitrogen trading market in the world. It has allowed farmers to do things that they wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. And I'd have to say that it was crucial to the success of the Lake Taupō Protection Trust achieving its goals.
One of the largest properties to change land use and also trade in nitrogen is high above Lake Taupō. 8,000 hectares of Tūwharetoa land, predominantly in sheep and beef farming, led the way. While farming animals still carries on, it is at significantly reduced levels. John Hura, chairman of the farming operation, has overseen a big shift to low nitrogen forestry use of the land. Economically, the move to trees has meant the iwi farming partnership being able to trade and sell nitrogen and participate in the new and developing carbon market. This meant positive financial returns for their shareholders.
All our owners were totally in support of protecting the lake, so that was paramount here. So they saw the lake as being, you know, it needed to be protected no matter what, really, and we needed to do play our part in that, and so that was, you know, that just went without saying, really. So environmental protection and the commercial opportunities they just married very nicely in this case.
One of the more difficult issues to deal with has been the potential reduction in capital value of land due to nitrogen reduction agreements lasting 1,000 years.
The issue for us is that with Māori land, we can't sell our land. And so the nitrogen agreement allowed us to essentially sell down some of the capital component associated with our land while still retaining our land, and that was a key concept that we were able to pass on to our landowners. It was something that never been done before, and to be able to realise some capital from your land without actually selling your land, really important.
For there to have been any chance of bringing about major change to improve Lake Taupō, the role of central government was crucial. The Minister for the Environment, Dr. Nick Smith, says all of those involved can now quite rightly be proud of what has been achieved, when internationally there has been so little progress made in dealing with diffuse pollution of waterways and lakes.
One of the key issues that ministers across developed countries are struggling with is this whole issue of managing diffuse pollutants. Where there's huge interest in what's happened in Taupō is the community collaboration, the fact that we've used the market instrument and a purchasing arrangement for those nutrients, the fact that we're using land use controls to deal with it, and the fact that for one of the largest water bodies of New Zealand, Lake Taupō, but even by international standards, a very large water body, we've been able to successfully provide a mechanism for reducing those nutrients into the lake by 170 tonnes a year. That is inspiring other countries, that while these problems have historically been seen as unsolvable, Lake Taupō and New Zealand has got a case example that can be used for other significant water bodies across the world.
Ultimately, however, it was the Lake Taupō Protection Trust that was charged with achieving the policy of a 20% reduction of manageable nitrogen entering the lake. Trust Chief Executive at the time, Graham Fleming, says having a regime where both nitrogen and carbon could be traded was crucial to building the business cases for land use change.
Well, I guess the project as a whole is quite complex. I mean, you've got the whole regulatory system, the science, the enforcement procedures. You've got a whole bunch of stuff there which, it's quite hard for people to get their head around about. The trust role really was to try and simplify that and make a business case that people could look at land change, simple as that really, and getting that reduction. So while we had to work in with all that stuff, basically our job was to try and make a business case which was attractive to parties. I mean, the trust had no coercive powers, so we couldn't force people to deal with this. So basically the money that we received in order to do this job had to be sufficient to encourage people to look at land change and reduce nitrogen. New Zealand has this carbon legislation round about looking at a carbon system where you can pay for carbon reductions. And that really worked quite neatly between reducing or changing farming systems, particularly into trees, where you would the trees would ensure the nitrogen reduction because you're not got animals on the land, but you're also available to sell the carbon carbon dioxide reductions through the system that New Zealand has. Between the two of them, that made up a really attractive business case.
So land change around Taupō has set the scene for a cleaner lake for all New Zealanders in the years ahead. However, crucial to that is an agreement signed between all parties committing to ongoing monitoring to ensure those nitrogen reductions are being achieved. For Tūwharetoa, those reductions will see that Lake Taupō survives at its best, as it always has.
So the relationship that we have is deep and it's entwined in our history, our stories, our songs, and as the I guess a food bowl that has nourished many generations of our people over that time.
The Lake Taupō project is an undeniable success for what has been achieved so far. And with a constant watch on the lake, it will mean that Tūwharetoa and everyone else can treasure their special relationship with Lake Taupō into the future.
The project to protect Lake Taupō that's just been described represents a huge investment of time and money. It's taken 15 years to get to the stage we're at today. There have been countless meetings with stakeholders and policymakers. Over that time, literally dozens of local and regional councillors have come and gone. There have been multiple environment ministers, but somehow the determination to see the project through has persisted. It hasn't been a cheap project. Taxpayers and ratepayers have had to stump up $80 million. The result is a very sophisticated scheme that has attracted international attention. There's no other scheme in the world that seeks to limit and manage non-point source discharges in this way. If all goes well, 20% less nitrogen will find its way into the lake, and declining water quality should be arrested. But as they say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. This is not the end of the story. In fact, it's only the end of the beginning, because the effectiveness of the scheme will have to be monitored for decades. That task falls to the Regional Council. But it's equally important to maintain the community's engagement and interest. This scheme only came about because the entire catchment community came on board, and it has to stay on board, because only time will tell if the outcome that we're after is going to be achieved. Modelled outcomes and reality don't always coincide. If down the track new knowledge means we need to do more or do things differently, then we don't want to have to start all over again from scratch engaging the community. So, keeping everyone engaged and informed is the challenge going forward. Only if we do that can we guarantee the future of this magical lake for future generations. Hei kaitiaki, tātou katoa.
Pairangi ngā taha, e tara pairangi tihe.